My brother-in-law kicked me out after 2 years of raising my late sister's kids, all because I asked them to make lunch once. Now he's furious I left without saying goodbye. 2 years ago, my sister passed away, leaving behind two boys, David, 12, and Peter, 7. My brother-in-law was struggling to juggle everything, and he was looking to hire a maid to help care for the kids. I couldn't stand the thought of someone else raising them when they're my blood, so I offered to step in. For 2 years, I've been taking care of them as if they were my own. Every day I'd wake up early, make their breakfast, clean the house, do the dishes, wash their clothes, feed and care for the 50 chickens on the property, all while managing my own studies. I did it all without a complaint. I wanted to, because I loved them and wanted to keep my sister's memory alive through them. One Sunday, after 2 years of doing everything without a single mistake, I went out for a walk. I asked David, now 14, to prepare lunch, which was a simple meal. He said he could manage, and I trusted him. It was the one day my brother-in-law was off from work, so I thought maybe he could help too. A few hours later, I got a call from my in-law, and to my shock, he told me to start looking for a new place because, in his words, I wasn't helping enough. All because I asked David to handle one meal, one time in 2 years. I was crushed. I thought I had done everything right, but apparently that one day was enough for him to decide I wasn't good enough. I didn't argue or fight back. I packed my things and left quietly. Now, my in-law is angry that I left without a word. Aetia for leaving after everything I did, just because I didn't cook lunch one time? Update 1. I didn't expect this to blow up the way it did, but I appreciate everyone who's taken the time to comment and message me. It's been a lot to process, and honestly, I didn't think so many people would care about what I thought was a pretty straightforward situation. I guess I should start by addressing a few things people seem to be wondering about and fill in some gaps that maybe weren't so clear in my original post. First off, let me make it clear. My decision to leave wasn't because of that one incident with lunch. I can see how it might have come across that way, but that wasn't what it was about. That was just the tipping point, you know? It's like when you've been holding so much inside for so long, and then something small happens and it just breaks you. That's what that Sunday lunch incident was for me. It wasn't really about the lunch itself, but what it represented, I guess. For 2 years, I've been living with my brother-in-law and my nephews. After my sister passed away, I wanted to make sure her kids were taken care of in a way that would honor her memory. I didn't want to see them with a stranger, some maid or nanny who didn't know them or didn't care about them the way family would. My brother-in-law was struggling a lot after she passed. Understandably so. And I stepped in because I loved those boys and wanted to help. At first, it was supposed to be temporary, just until things got back to normal. But normal never really happened. I found myself taking on more and more responsibility. I was waking up early every day to make sure the boys had breakfast before school, helping them with their homework after, doing the laundry, cleaning the house, making dinner, taking care of the chickens, which, let me tell you, was no small task with 50 of them running around, and managing all of this while trying to keep up with my own studies. It was exhausting, but I didn't complain because I felt like it was the right thing to do. And, I mean, I loved them, and I loved my sister, so it didn't feel like a burden at the time. It felt like something I should be doing. What I didn't realize, though, was that my brother-in-law seemed to be checking out more and more as time went on. It was like the more I did, the less he felt he needed to do. At first, he was really hands-on with the boys, but over time, he started disappearing more, either working late or going out on the weekends. He'd tell me he needed a break, which, again, I understood because he lost his wife, but it got to the point where I was doing everything. And I mean everything. He started leaving early for work and coming home later and later. On his days off, he'd say he was running errands but would be gone for hours, leaving me alone with the boys. At some point, it stopped feeling like I was helping out and more like I was the parent. David and Peter started coming to me for everything, from school projects to emotional support, and while I loved being there for them, I started to wonder why their dad wasn't stepping up more. I mean, I get it. Grief is hard, but it felt like he was using me as a crutch so he didn't have to deal with the reality of raising 2 kids on his own. Anyway, fast forward to that Sunday. I had been planning to go for a walk just to clear my head. I hadn't had a moment to myself in what felt like ages, and I thought it'd be a good idea to get some fresh air. I wasn't going to be gone long, just a couple of hours, so I asked David, who's 14 now, if he could handle making lunch. It wasn't anything complicated, just something simple like sandwiches or reheating leftovers. He said he could manage, and I trusted him. After all, he's a teenager now, and I figured it was a good opportunity for him to take on a little responsibility. Plus, my brother-in-law was home that day, and I thought if David needed help, he could always ask his dad. Well, while I was out on my walk, I got a call from my brother-in-law. At first, I thought maybe something had happened, like one of the boys got hurt or something. But instead, he tells me out of nowhere that I should start looking for a new place to live. I was completely blindsided. I asked him what he meant, and he said that I wasn't helping enough. I didn't understand where this was coming from, so I asked him what he was talking about. He said, "If you can't even make lunch, what's the point of you being here?" I was shocked. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, for 2 years, I had been doing everything for those kids, for the house, for him. And he was upset because I asked David to handle one meal? It was like all the work I had done, all the sacrifices I had made, didn't mean anything to him. I didn't know what to say, so I just told him, "Okay." I packed up my things that evening and left quietly. I didn't want to make a scene in front of the boys, and honestly, I was just too tired to fight about it. Now, here's the part that really gets me. A couple of days after I left, my brother-in-law called me again. But this time, he was angry that I had left without saying anything to the boys. He said I was abandoning them and that I should have at least told them goodbye. But how could I? How could I sit down and explain to David and Peter that I had to leave because their dad didn't think I was doing enough? How could I explain to them that after 2 years of pouring everything into taking care of them, I wasn't wanted anymore? I don't know what to do now. I'm heartbroken because I miss them so much. But at the same time, I feel like maybe I was being taken advantage of. I don't want to cause any more drama, but I also don't want to just disappear from their lives like this. A lot of people have been telling me I'm not the asshole for leaving, but I can't help but feel guilty. I don't want the boys to think I abandoned them. Maybe I should have handled it differently. I just didn't know what else to do at the time. Update 2. Hey everyone. It's been a little while since my first update, and things have gotten complicated. I honestly didn't expect to be back with another update so soon, but a lot has happened since I left, and I figured it was time to fill you all in. First off, thank you to everyone who reached out with kind words and advice. It's been overwhelming to receive so much support from strangers, and I've been reading through all the comments and messages slowly, trying to take it all in. So, after I left, I decided to stay with a friend for a bit. I needed some space to figure out my next steps, and she's been amazing, giving me the room to just breathe and process everything. But while I was there, I couldn't stop thinking about David and Peter. They were my main concern. I kept wondering how they were doing, if they were okay, if they thought I abandoned them like their dad said. I knew I had to talk to them, but I wasn't sure how to approach it. I didn't want to make things worse, and I didn't want to get into a fight with my brother-in-law either. I ended up deciding to text David first, just to see how he was doing and to let him know I hadn't forgotten about them. It was a simple message, something like, "Hey, how are you and Peter doing? I miss you guys." I didn't want to say too much because I didn't want to put him in the middle of everything, but I also wanted him to know I still cared. "Well," David replied almost immediately, and the message was not what I expected. He told me that Peter had been crying for days, asking where I was and why I left, and that my brother-in-law had told them I left because I was tired of them. When I read that, my heart just shattered. I mean, how could he say that to them? How could he lie like that? I never left because I was tired of the boys. If anything, I left because I felt like my presence wasn't enough for their dad anymore, but I never wanted the boys to think it was because of them. I immediately texted David back and told him that wasn't true, that I didn't leave because of him or Peter, and that I loved them both very much. I tried to explain that it was a misunderstanding between me and their dad, and that I never meant to hurt them by leaving. David didn't say much in response, but I could tell he was upset. He just said, "I don't know what to believe anymore." That hit me hard. I realized that, without meaning to, I had left them in a really confusing situation, and now they were stuck in the middle of it, not knowing what was real. I decided I needed to talk to my brother-in-law. As much as I didn't want to confront him, I knew it wasn't fair to let things continue like this. The boys deserved the truth, and we needed to clear the air, even if it was uncomfortable. So, I called him. At first, he didn't answer, but I kept calling until he finally picked up. The conversation was tense right from the start. He sounded annoyed that I was reaching out, and before I could even say anything, he went off about how I'd abandoned the boys and how irresponsible it was of me to leave without saying goodbye. I tried to stay calm and explain that I didn't leave because of the boys, but because of what he said to me. I told him how much his words hurt, and how I felt like all my efforts over the past 2 years had been dismissed like they didn't matter. I tried to tell him that asking David to make lunch that one time wasn't about me shirking responsibility, but about giving him some independence and trusting him to handle something simple. That's when things got really weird. My brother-in-law paused for a long time, and then he said something that caught me completely off guard. He said, "You were never supposed to stay this long. I didn't ask for any of this." I was floored. I didn't know what to say at first. He hadn't asked for any of this? I mean, yeah, technically he didn't ask me to stay for 2 years, but I thought we had an understanding. I stepped in because I didn't want to see the boys end up with a stranger and because I thought he needed the help. But hearing him say that made me realize that maybe we had different expectations all along. He went on to say that he appreciated what I'd done, but that he felt like I'd taken over in a way that made him feel pushed out of his own home. That really confused me because, from my perspective, I only took on more responsibility when he started checking out. I was doing everything because I felt like he wasn't stepping up, but apparently he saw it differently. He said that he felt like I had taken over the boys' lives and that he didn't know how to be their dad anymore with me around. I didn't know what to say to that. I mean, I was only trying to help. But I guess in his eyes, my helping had become overbearing. He didn't say it outright, but I got the sense that he felt threatened by the bond I had with David and Peter. He said something like, "You're not their mother," which stung because, of course, I know I'm not. I never tried to replace my sister, but I also couldn't just stand by and do nothing. By the end of the conversation, it was clear we were both hurt and frustrated, but we weren't really getting anywhere. I told him that we needed to figure this out for the sake of the boys, but he didn't seem interested in talking anymore. He said he needed space to think and hung up. So now I'm left feeling stuck. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to fight to stay in the boys' lives because I love them and I know they need stability, especially after everything they've been through. But another part of me wonders if my brother-in-law is right. Maybe I was too overbearing. Maybe I didn't give him enough room to be their dad. But then again, if he wanted to be their dad, why wasn't he stepping up before? I've been going back and forth on what to do next. I don't want to make things worse, but I also don't want the boys to think I abandoned them. I've been considering writing them a letter, something that explains everything in a way that's not too heavy for them, but I'm not sure if that's the right move. At the end of the day, I just want what's best for them, and I'm not sure if me being in the picture is helping or hurting at this point. If anyone has been in a similar situation, I'd love to hear how you handled it. Right now, I'm just trying to figure out the best way forward without causing more damage than I already have. Final update. Hey everyone! This will be my last update because I think the situation has reached its conclusion, and honestly, I'm drained. First, I want to thank everyone who has been following this story and offering their advice and support. It's been a roller coaster of emotions, but I think I've finally come to terms with everything. After my last update, I took some time to really reflect on everything that's happened. I was torn about whether I should try to stay involved in David and Peter's lives or step back and give them, and their dad, space. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that what I want might not be the same as what's best for them. I love those boys like they're my own, And that love made me feel like I needed to fight to stay involved. But I also had to consider the fact that my presence might be complicating things more than helping, especially with my brother-in-law feeling the way he does. So here's what happened. A few days after my conversation with my brother-in-law, I decided to go over to the house to talk things out in person. I didn't want to leave things hanging, and I knew this conversation needed to happen face to face. Plus, I needed to see the boys and make sure they were okay. I wasn't planning on staying for long. I just wanted to clear the air and see if there was any way we could come to some kind of understanding. When I got there, it was awkward, to say the least. My brother-in-law wasn't exactly welcoming, but he let me in. The boys were in their rooms, so it was just the two of us talking at first. I could tell he was still frustrated, but I think he knew we couldn't leave things the way they were. I started by telling him that I never meant to overstep or take over his role as their dad, but that I felt like I had to step in because, from my perspective, he wasn't doing enough. He seemed surprised by that, and we ended up having a pretty open, though uncomfortable conversation about how we'd both been feeling over the past 2 years. It turns out he'd been struggling a lot more than I realized. Not just with losing my sister, but with figuring out how to be a single parent. He admitted that in the beginning, he was relieved to have me there because it took some of the pressure off. But over time, he started feeling like he was losing control of his own household, like I was making decisions for the boys without considering him. I honestly hadn't seen it that way. From my perspective, I was just trying to keep things running smoothly. But looking back, I can see how he might have felt pushed aside. We talked for a while about how things had gotten to this point, and it was actually kind of eye-opening. I realized that in my effort to fill the void my sister left, I might have been unintentionally taking over too much. I thought I was helping by handling everything, but in doing so, I might have made him feel like he wasn't needed, and that was never my intention. Then we got to the hard part, the boys. I told him I wanted to talk to David and Peter before making any decisions. He was hesitant at first, but eventually he agreed. So I went to talk to them, and that was probably the hardest conversation I've ever had. When they saw me, both of them looked confused and a little hurt. Peter, being younger, was quick to ask why I had left, and David was quieter, just watching me with this look that broke my heart. I sat them down and explained as best as I could, without putting too much blame on their dad or making it seem like it was their fault. I told them I loved them both very much and that leaving wasn't about them. I explained that sometimes adults have problems they need to work out, and that's what had happened between me and their dad. Peter started crying, and I could barely hold it together. I hugged him and told him that no matter what, I'd always be there for him and David if they needed me. David, on the other hand, was harder to read. He didn't say much, but after a while, he just nodded and said, "I get it." I'm not sure if he really gets it, but I hope he understands that I never wanted to leave them like that. After that conversation, I knew what I had to do. I had to step back. I told my brother-in-law that I wouldn't be moving back in, but that I still wanted to stay involved in the boys' lives. I suggested we set up a regular schedule for me to visit or take the boys out. Maybe once a week or so, just so they know I'm still around and still care about them. He agreed, though he seemed a bit reluctant, like he wasn't sure if that was the right call. But I made it clear that I wasn't trying to interfere anymore. I just wanted to make sure the boys knew they weren't losing me entirely. That was about a week ago. Since then, I've seen the boys once. We went out for ice cream, and it was nice, but different. There's definitely a shift in the dynamic, and I think it's going to take some time for all of us to adjust. I'm trying to stay positive, though. I know this is what needs to happen if their dad is going to step up and really be the parent they need. And if me stepping back helps him do that, then that's what I have to do. It's hard, though. It feels like I'm losing them, even though I know I'm not. I just have to trust that this is for the best, and that, in time, things will settle into a new normal. And I've been working on getting my own life back on track. Now that I'm not living there full-time, I have more time to focus on my studies and take care of myself. It's weird not having the day-to-day responsibility of taking care of the boys, but I think I need this break as much as they do. It's time for all of us to figure out our roles again, and I hope that in doing so, we can all come out of this stronger. So that's it, I guess. This whole experience has been a huge learning curve, and while it's been painful, I'm trying to see the positives. I'll always love David and Peter, and I'll always be there for them, but now it's time for their dad to step up and for me to take a step back. Thank you all again for the support. It's meant more to me than you know.